Welcome to the Stockman Grass Farmer Podcast, where our mission is to help create a healthy planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production. Today, we're diving into part 3 of our series with Darren Doherty, where he explores the powerful integration of trees, livestock, and infrastructure into agricultural landscapes.
When we're looking at access, I'm a bit of a tree guy, and I like to integrate trees into agricultural landscapes because there's a lot of benefits to doing so from a shade and shelter perspective, and we even do that on cropland. So this the photo on the right there is one at Geelong Grammar, which is where Prince Charles, now King Charles, went to school when he came to Australia, and I designed that estate in 1999, 2000. We planted 38,000 trees in an alley farming layout. It's the most expensive school in Australia. It costs $85,000 a year to send a child there without the uniform, so they go there naked. I just made that up. Can't you tell? So I go past there. I mean, it's quite amazing to go because it was just completely bare fields, and we put all of these alleys of trees in, and we used. And it's a mixed farm, so they use, they've got they grow crops, cereal crops, and they have sheep there. So we put in these rows of trees, and we put the turning area. So this is another access consideration. Just like when you build a garden, you've got to get your wheelbarrow around, right? Well, when you're on a farm, you've got to get a tractor, or if you're towing something, you've got to get it around. So you've got to accommodate for the access of vehicles. But alley farming, I'd love to see a lot of alley farming done especially in the Midwest, where it's so flat and so exposed and so on. Gives a whole bunch of benefits. I will share this presentation, sir, so if you feel free to take any photos, but I'll share it with Stockman Grass Farmers so they can distribute it to your emails. And then you can present it yourselves, and well, look at me. Just wipe out the front. So ecosystem. So this was a yeoman's tree layer, and we debated how we initially called it the forestry layer and then turned it into the ecosystems layer. It's the living layer, and it's how we integrate plant systems into farming landscapes, and there's so many. And with that comes a whole bunch of integrations. I mean, Polyface is probably the greatest innovator in terms of agricultural integrations of flora, fauna, fungi, etc. You've got all of the kingdoms of nature integrated at Polyface in some way, shape, or form. There's lots of other people who are doing that and have done that for a long time as well, in different ways. My friend Jimmy Elizondo and Andy Darlington in Mexico and France, they've been doing it for 30 or 40 years as well. There's a whole bunch of people who are doing a lot of really great work with integration. How does it look though? How does the integration look? So this is one of my high net worth clients in Western Australia, and they sponsored us to do some illustrations, which I said will be useful later. And this is where we're looking at what are two different layouts. And, I advise you when you're building your farm plan and you're looking at how you're going to integrate trees into it, you look at Polyface, and, often the question of Polyface is, why don't you have trees out in the fields, right? And I think it's a valid question. Why don't you have trees out in the field? Well, that's because they make a lot of hay here. And when you do have trees in the field, well, then that obviously, especially if you've got a little bit of a prickly sort of humid climate where drying hay might be difficult, then you won't have trees in the paddocks. Or you might shift to having north-south trees so you get good solar access. But how much area have you got to spare for trees, right? So there's all of those things. One thing about tree integration though is that there's a shelter belt formula in terms of livestock and crop protection, which is worth remembering, and that is that 10 to 20 times the tree height is what you'll get in protection, right? Now, that's not if you just have a single row of trees where all the wind just goes through the bottom of the trees. This is a multi-row shelter belt. So ideally, you would have an odd-numbered shelter belt. So you'd have trees in the middle, and then you might have shrubbery on the outside. And that's really good too. I often favour using prickly shrubs on the outside because it forms a bit of a natural fence, but it's also really good habitat for all of those insectivorous birds, which are really great for going out into your landscape. So you're starting to build the biodiversity outcomes, and who doesn't like all those little critters, right? So, but then it comes in layout. So the sort of layout that has been the most common in human landscapes for thousands of years has been the savanna layout. Wide-spaced trees across the landscape. Apparently, many parts of, when you read the explorers' reports of Australia, the United States, still in existence in places like Spain, are these beautiful savanna landscapes, parts of Africa and so on. And it's I think it's a landscape that we naturally have an affinity to. But from a grazing management perspective, it's a bit of a pain in the derriere. So that's why we're looking at the variations here, and it's good for you to look. You want to have trees for shelter and all of the other benefits, but just try and reflect on and give yourself the license to compare options, right? And do that on the map. So here we've got one which is more of an alley farming layout or a shelter belt layout, and then the next one is where we've got a full savanna. What we did with these clients is we said, all right, let's go through and look at the options analysis of what are the pros and cons of these different layouts, because it is such a big frame to the property, right? When you put these organisms into it, it's not. It's one thing to fence a landscape, but then when you go and put trees into it, it really changes the frame of it. So, and they stay. They'll probably outlast you. So it's a really permanent decision to make about their placement. And then to that is what species you will plant. One of the things that we sort of are burdened with, and it's a good burden, is the choice of what species we can plant. So, but you only have so many spots. So we use a tree index to help us with that, which is basically an algorithm a very simple algorithm to help you determine which species get the highest score for the criteria that you're interested in. Let's say you're into lumber, right? Like Joel has got they've got a sawmill here, a portable sawmill. Well, if you've got a place that's got no trees, well then it's likely that you'll put trees in that you want to turn into lumber someday. So you will select those trees. How many of those are available? What are suited? All of those different things. You might be a bee person, right? Which trees have more bee possibilities, and on it goes. Apart from whether those trees are suited to different parts of your landscape or not. And then there's the pattern of placement, right? Is it an alley? We use keyline patterns. This is an olive grove, or a couple of olive groves that I put in the early 2000s. The top one is got for the last 5 years. It's won the gold medal for the best Australian olive oil. It's beautiful. It's green in colour. It's when you make aioli out of it, it's a lime green aioli. It's amazing. Love aioli with potato chips. French fries, I think you call them here. I usually make more aioli than chips. So buildings. This has become very interesting. The advent of, well, I think I've seen some, and Joel, you would have seen this before as well, some old, especially from England, old photos of sort of rickshaws with chickens and so on. So, but there's some amazing innovations as far as all of this is concerned, and so too with portable sawmills, portable abattoirs, everything being portable. So that's what we look at in this layer. One of the other things that we look at when it comes to this layer is how do we actually look at the workflows of connectivity. So this is a consultation I did for Mike Callicrate of, some of you would know the Callicrate Cattle Company and the Callicrate Bander in Kansas, and what's the next state over? Colorado, thank you. And what Mike was asking us to do was to try and understand his built environment, and because he has an on-farm slaughterhouse, how are we going to integrate all of it with the yards and the livestock and the byproducts and and try and get it so that we didn't have any waste. So we come up with this paddock to paddock sort of concept, as opposed to a paddock to plate, have a paddock to paddock concept. So we went as far as to recover the bones from consumers so that we then put them through bone char, and the bone char has a higher level of, so that's where you char bones to 560 degrees centigrade in a biochar sort of retort. And when we did the analysis on the bone char, it had a higher analysis of phosphorus and calcium than superphosphate does. So it was really clear. It was, when animals are walking off your property, the majority of what is actually being eaten is meat, and muscle doesn't have a huge amount of nutrient. The nutrient is in the viscera, right? It's in all of the offal and the viscera, and a lot of people don't eat that anymore. So in a lot of cases, that is wasted, and most of his markets are those. Although he's started to move into making mince, which is mixed with offal, which I think is a really great way of doing it. And I was in Italy in 2019, and we were with the butcher that we were buying from there in Milan. He was aging his burgers for 180 days, dry aging, and they were like out of this world. But they were a mixed offal and muscle meat, ground beef. It was incredible. But that takes a particular culture, right? A particular food culture to accept that, right? You wouldn't go to a new farmer's market with a product like that, right? You just go with ground beef, right? But it just goes to show that there's some people doing some amazing things out there. So movable pig, this is at McIver. So McIver have a plug-and-play portable housing system. So they've got their stainless steel water drinkers built into the structure. They move the shelters using the forks of the tractor, and they use Kiwi Tech fencing, which I think Ken Cove sell. There's a plug for those good people. I think they do. I hope they do. Someone does. But it's all sprung, so you can literally just lift the shelter up, unplug it from the water supply, and literally just drive straight over the fence. Because the fence is sprung, you can drive over the whole thing. So it's a very, very modular, portable landscape. They move their pigs, so it's a very different system to what we have here at Polyface, where the feeder, once the feeder is emptied, then that's the signal to move, right? Here we have really good access, and this is the context, right? This is a really good example of context. Their landscape is inherently very poorly suited to pigs, but they're both pig people. Belinda and Jason are pig people. They love pigs. They wake up every morning thinking pigs, right? And this is their family farm, and this is the landscape, but it's really poorly suited to pigs. But they've overcome that by moving their pigs every 1 to 3 days, right? So that the trigger for their disturbance is not that the feed bin's empty, it's 20% ground disturbance, because that's the magic figure that we've determined. And they have increased. Everyone said, you will turn this place backwards, it will become annuals, etc. They have increased all of the perennials by it's mostly perennials now, which everyone, and when we did, you might recall, Joel, we did the planning for sustainable animal industry. So the government decided that they were going to change the regulations for permitting how many animals you could have, chickens and so on, without a full-blown environmental planning assessment, which was going to cost $50,000 to $60,000 per landholder to do. We battled against that, so went and talked to bureaucrats. I do a bit better job than someone else does, I think. Went to several meetings. And anyway, what was resolved was that the arbiter of success or approval was ground cover. I think it was the first time that ground cover was the metric for livestock production on a landscape in the world. So, and these people went from being the pariahs to every photo in the government document guidelines were these guys. Yeah, which was awesome. But built on the practices that came from polyface. So, like again, you see practices in one place. It's then for you to individualize that when you get home. It's agriculture is not a cookie cutter, right? John knows this with his agronomy work. You don't go to every place and apply the same amount of mineral or the same biofertilizer regime or whatever. Every one of you, every field is different, every slope is different. You've got to be aware of that nuance. This is at Carversville Farm, which I was talking to someone about last night in Carversville in northern Pennsylvania. They have these, I think it's Stoltzfus chicken houses growing in a cover crop. I mean, there's lots of different variations there's Daniel O'Brien's chicken caravans, which he markets all over the world. There's lots of different ways that you can house a chook, as we call them. It's spelt CHOOOK. That's what Australians call chickens, chooks. It's not chook, it's a chook. Yeah. There's also portable dairies. We're part of a milk CSA. Tessa Seller, she has 8 cows. She charges $4 a litre, which is $4 a quart. We pay up front. We get 10 litres a week. We come to the farmers market to pick up, and people go, "Wow, you drink a lot of milk." We go, "Yeah, we sure do." And we still buy milk because we run out, but we can't buy any more from the subscription. But she's got a 4-stall portable dairy, and so the dairy moves around with the herd. So there's all of these additional innovations which are out there. Willie O'Leary's system which is the one in the bottom right, that folds up like a concertina. It's in Ireland, and it drives down narrow Irish roads, which I don't know if any of you have been to Ireland. The roads are pretty small, right? It's built for horse and cart, and small horses and cart, and small Irishmen, and leprechaun farming, I think it's called. But this whole thing, he has 120 cows get milked by that, and he moves the whole thing. So when you talk about, when I was working at the Cowdrey estate in Sussex, in England, we were looking at building dairies there, new dairies. It was going to cost $3 million per dairy, right? For a bricks and mortar dairy. These are like $100,000, $150,000, right? And you don't have to own land, right? So there's all of these elements to doing that. And you move, what's the biggest problem with a dairy? Is effluent management. No one wants to be next to a modern dairy. Go to California and see what those dairies are like, or the big mega dairies in New Zealand or Australia or elsewhere. Horrible places. So it takes that away, as does the portable abattoir. I mean, I think everyone's aware of the rationalisation of the of slaughterhouse industries all over the world. It's not just here, and it's a major problem, and it's a major limit to people entering a direct marketed paddock to plate sort of style marketing system, or getting a better share of the product. The other problem that we've seen is that the distance that people have to take their animals is actually undermining their family life. So we had one client, Michael and Alex Hicks, they're in the middle of New South Wales, which is a big state. And they had a pastured pig operation. They were driving their pigs 8 hours to get them processed, right? They were getting good money for their pigs, but they determined they made they got a 40-foot refrigerated shipping container, set it up. Michael had to become a meat inspector, so he had to go to a night college to get his meat certificate license, did all of that. Cost them $80,000. And it cost them the cost of, and this is an important point, it cost them the cost of production, the cost of slaughtering was exactly the same as them driving, but they didn't going to this place, but they didn't have to do that. He didn't have to leave the farm. Most farmers don't want to leave their farm, right? So it didn't save them any money, but it saved their marriage, right? Yeah. So fencing. Who likes fencing? Well, I've got a few. I think when I walked through there the other day, I think every stall was just about a fencing stall. So someone must like fencing, or there's a lot of fencing to do. Lots of different ways. So one of the things that we've become, well, I've always been interested in it, but even more so, I've struck up a friendship with Bruce Maynard, who's the current. So we have a Best Farmer of Australia award called the Bob Hawke Land Care Award, and Bruce is the current winner of that. He developed two different agricultural methods. One is called no-kill cropping, which I'll discuss later, and the other is stress-free stockmanship. So I'll talk about that in a minute. But we think that the first fence, livestock fence, is stockmanship. It's not a physical fence. It's the behaviour of animals which you are trying to nurture and trying to pass on from generation to generation. So stress-free stockmanship, a lot of you would be familiar with what Bruce has titled as 4 levels of stockmanship. So the first level is what many of you would be familiar with, and that's Temple Grandin's work, wonderful work, which has been incredible. What an incredible person. And there's a lot to that, but it's actually progressed. A lot of you would be familiar with low-stress animal handling or stockmanship by Bud Williams and his daughter Tina and so on. And it's got its methods. Then there's stress-free stockmanship, which Bruce and others have developed, which is the next level, which is called level 3. And then the 4th level, which Bruce is doing actively on large cattle stations in Australia in particular, and that's called self-herding. So I don't know if Kit Farrow's here yet, but he has the Herd Quitter program. I don't think these two things relate, but notwithstanding, the whole concept of self-herding is actually not using fences at all. It's basically turning your livestock into dogs. It's training them. It's giving them decoys. It's working on the thing that we all do. Why do we use Facebook half the time? No, it's because of the dopamine hit from getting a like. Yeah. It's the same as when we get the mail. You get the mail. Oh, someone sent me a card, and back in the day remember when we got mail and your grandma sent you a card, and you open it up and went, "Wow, this is amazing," and you got a real dopamine hit. So reward is, and this is the interesting thing. You even with livestock and us, it's the promise of a reward without even getting the reward, which can be used. So there's a lot of psychology which is going into all of this, and it's fascinating work. So if you do get a chance, have a look at that. So the other part of fencing is where to put fences, right, when you are building them. We look at it from the perspective of land elements. So land elements are what the scientists would describe as all of the different parts of a landscape. When you break it down, you've got different, you've got crests and you've got simple slopes, you've got open depression, you've got closed depressions, etc., etc. So all of you will have a different shape to your landscape. And the classic thing that's always been done is that those divisions in shape are where you would put fences, right? That's one way of doing it. When we look at some layouts, as you look at the image on the left there, often people will fence out creeks. I know down here, the main creek at the bottom here has a fence beside it. That's a pretty common thing to do, riparian fencing, right? How far back do you go from that? One of the things that on floodplain landscapes like we've got down here near the entrance where that creek goes through, one of the things that we're doing more of, so when riparian fencing started, the fences started right on the edge, almost on the edge of the cliff, right? Because you didn't want to give up too much area. Right, and I get that. What we've started to do is actually make that go right back. So we'll give a good 50 to 100 yards of fence back from the creek, because we understand that when we use managed grazing, that we can actually restore the creek edge. And so often what you see is people have the fence right up next to the channel of the creek, and the fence sort of starts to the two start to meet and you get a fence, some T-posts which are now part of the channel, right? So, and that's often because people aren't necessarily managing their grazing as well, or they haven't given a sufficient buffer, or they haven't planted willows and other plants along there which have fibrous root systems which are going to hold it all together. So there's a few reasons for that. So generally, when we've got V-shaped valleys or steep valleys where we can't get livestock access, we'll fence them out. But if we have more open valleys, we'll leave them for grazing, because that's generally where your best country is. And we'll put the accesses or the laneways on the ridges. So that's where we'll change the divisions. Then there's how wide your lane.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stockman Grass Farmer Podcast, where we're dedicated to helping you create a healthier planet and people through profitable grass-based livestock production.